Okay, it's 1 o'clock Hamburg time. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Hamburg, Germany. Welcome to the first webinar on enhancing national capacities for monitoring RALE, one in a series of 7 seminars, of regional seminars, with which we are opening a dialogue between UNESCO and stakeholders and among stakeholders for the sake of good communication with regard to international adult learning and education. My name is Werner Mauch. I am program specialist at UIL. I am responsible for the production and preparation of the global report and adult learning and education, which is done by my team, by the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. The UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg is UNESCO's entity caring for and devoted to lifelong learning with a focus on adult learning and education, continuing education, and specifically adult literacy. We are going to have several, well, just one presentation in principle. I would now just like to invite for the beginning my co-host. The series of webinars is organized by UIL in cooperation with DVV International and the International Council of Adult Education. I would now like to invite the co-host, Uwe Gartenschläger from DVV International, to open with me today's seminar. Please, Uwe, go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Werner, and my excuse for my very difficult family name for the non-German speakers. It is my pleasure to give some opening remarks here in our first webinar. I think the first one is especially exciting because we will see how everything works. And I would like to greet you on behalf today of 3 organizations. The first one Werner just mentioned, which is DVV International, the international branch of the German Adult Education Association. And you might wonder why a national entity is involved here. It is just because we have a 50 years record of working in adult education and development. And we have, and you might see that from the chat already, offices in several countries around the globe, including Eastern Europe and Caucasus regions. My second head today is the International Council for Adult Education, which is the global umbrella organization of civil society organizations in adult learning and education, representing the sector in the UN structures and advocating and implementing the difficult task of advocating for adult learning and education on the global level. And my third head today is, especially as this is the European region, I'm the president of the European Association for Adult Education, with about 130 members from 43 European countries. Allow me in my opening remark just to limit to 2 points. As a perspective of civil society, the first point would be that to mention that we were quite happy that in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals identified lifelong learning as a framework for education. Education throughout the whole life, which is a paradigm shift to what we had before. And we as adult learning and education especially were especially happy that now the focus is not only on the first years of formal schooling, but learning through the whole lifespan, regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, or social status. This leaving no one behind is our chance in Confintea as well, to work more closely on our sector, the adult learning and education, as an integral part of the lifelong learning paradigm. Our perspective is that if we would like to have an impact on the future of the education sector as RALE organizations, it would be important that we do not neglect the SDGs in our Confintea process. And if we are working on ALE, we should relate our Confintea process as much as possible to the SDGs, because from our experience, the SDGs is where governments and policies are orientating at. And the other process which seems to be interesting and which I'm sure we can discuss further on is UNESCO's Futures of Education process, where we would like to reflect all together on the future of education globally. My second point is, and this is regards especially to Europe, and I'm not an expert in North America, so I will talk for Europe only, to understand adult learning and education, ALE, holistically. We came through from a period in the last decade when adult learning and education was mainly focusing on basic education and technical and vocational upskilling. I think especially the pandemic showed us that we have to regard and to understand adult learning and education wider and put more attention to neglected aspects like health education, digital literacy, or civic education. So we are very happy that the topic of GRALE 5 is about citizenship education, which covers a lot of these neglected areas. EAA developed the concept of life skills, which might be relevant for our discussion as well. Our task is not so much to equip our people with some specific knowledge or skills, but what we call life skills, to enable them to navigate to our ever faster changing world and be able to address and to implement a transformative action, especially for the new normal after the crisis. So today, at least for me, the Confintea process officially starts. I'm happy to be a part of it. I wish us all the best. I wish us a lot of new knowledge, skills, and exchange today and in the upcoming months and years. So all the best, and be assured that we as a civil society will be a partner in this process, and we are very grateful to UNESCO and URL that we can be a partner here.
Thank you very much, Uwe, for these opening words and for also opening, so to see, the arena of Confintea. And I welcome your official start into the Confintea 7 process, so to say, that will culminate in Confintea 7 in 2 years from now. I would just like to give us a set of instructions. Summer, I think we should now see the second slide. Which gives us, or should give us in principle, the information, about the settings. And in principle, you will see that there is not that much dialogue possible at the moment. Your microphone as well as the camera are disabled. That has some reasons in the technicalities on the one hand, but you will also see that our interactive situations are not that, available in abundance. Nevertheless, the interactive part should go in written form. This will help somehow to make our life a bit easier. And so we would like to ask participants to put questions into the question and answer setting and the chat function for posting any comments. So there is the possibility to put specific questions in the Q&A section and comments into the chat function. We will try to collect the questions, also structure them. There are some people working in the background helping me and us so that your questions will not be lost. And so I would like to ask you to give all the questions into the Q&A part, comments into the chat function. We have already mentioned it once, but I would to underline this again, and most probably you are aware of that this session is being recorded and that the recording will be made public on the URL website, so that you should be aware that this limits to a certain extent privacy. Okay, then let me now go into the first part. I am going to, how to say, talk a lot in this first part. I am trying to give you an overview over the Confintea process. I would just like to, again, to focus what do we intend with this whole set of webinars. We are organizing one in each region. And our principal idea from URL side is to strengthen the understanding and the importance of the GRALE process, to help the international community what the Global Report on Adult Learning and Education is all about, why it serves as a global monitoring tool for adult learning and education, and why it serves as a track instrument within the framework of Confintea. And I will come back to these abbreviations during my presentation. Second objective for us within these seminars is that we want to apply and promote the Belem framework for action, the BFA, and the RALE as conceptual frameworks for global and national monitoring. We would like to understand the international community fully, those who have heard about already and those who have not, which role these two frameworks, policy frameworks, play, and why this should allow the international ALE community to become more active and to be more involved and to track process. We want to introduce the GRALE 5 monitoring survey to the international community, as well as to one specific part of the audience that is with us today. And this audience are, and I have to underline that again, are the focal points from countries who will doing the practical work for the GRALE survey. You will understand things better after, how to say, in the course of the presentation, I hope. And I would also underline that the seminar is divided into two parts. An open part, we will need to close that at 3 o'clock at the latest, and a second part for these focal points only, who will be then in a private session so that they get closer instructions on the technicalities, which is not that important for the wider public. And that's why we have divided the seminar into two parts. Finally, we want to provide a platform to engage key national ALE stakeholders across the region in data collection for ALE by means of using the GRALE 5 reporting template. So that's the principle, what we would like to understand, why this process is something that could be helpful for all those who are active in adult learning and education, be it as practitioner, be it as researcher, be it as policymaker, or be it in any other function that takes place in the field of adult learning and education. I will divide my presentation into 3 parts. At the beginning, I will explain what Confintea, the BFA, the RALE, and the GRALE is all about. This is about 1/3 of the presentation. In the second part, I will go a bit more closely into GRALE 5, its principles, its objectives. And in the final part, 3, I will explain the GRALE 5 monitoring survey. And again, I would like to encourage you to give your questions through the question and answer tool to us, so that we can respond to that in the time after this presentation. So Sama, next slide, please. As I said, I will try to explain the 2 key concepts, Confintea, Belem framework for action, RALE, and GRALE is even 4. and starting with Confintia. Many of you know already what it means about. Confintia means La Conférence Internationale sur l'Éducation des Adultes. It's a French acronym. It's the International Conference on Adult Education. It's organized by UNESCO roughly every 12 years, and it brings together the international RALE community to understand on the principles of their work how to promote adult learning and education within the next 12 years. It is on adult learning and education. The name is adult education, but the focus is on non-formal adult education. This conference does not deal that much about formal adult education, which is often taking place on the one hand as higher education, but in terms of second education, that's part of what the actors are interested in. We have had since 1949 6 international conferences already. The first in Elsinore in Denmark in 49, then one in Montreal in Canada, followed by Tokyo, then Paris in 1985, and in Hamburg 1997. Some of you might still remember the Hamburg conference, and a bit more might remember the Belem conference, which took place in 2009. 11 years from now. And we are now, as Uwe already mentioned, going into the next round. We are looking towards Confintia 7, the 7th International Conference on Adult Education will take place in 2002, in 2 years from now, in Morocco. And we are now starting this overall process towards that. The international RALE community, the conference is an instrument, but the purpose is, of course, to engage actors. A conference is not there to make a conference and to bring people together. That's just one part of it. It also ends up in a process, and it involves already a preparatory process, and then this process should help to organize the international community of adult learning and education. And this happens every 12 years. And now we come to the end of the Confintia 6 cycle and are heading into the next one. And so this is the principle about Confintia 6. Next slide, please. Confintia 6 adopted the Belem framework for action. As each of these conferences, the international community, member states especially, but member states means in the field of adult learning and education, government plus civil society plus research. From our understanding, the contribution of civil society is key, and practice in adult and non-formal adult learning and education is very much given by civil society organizations. So Confintia could not function without the contribution and the participation of civil society. So that's why we would like to help that civil society is recognized as a partner within this overall process, within member states and within the international process. Confintia 6 adopted the Belem framework for action. The BFA, you will hear this acronym perhaps more often at within the further discussions. And the Belem framework for action in principle is a set of recommendations how member states understand how they will promote the further development of adult learning and education within their constituencies within the next 12 years. And so the BFA, the Belem framework, has the form of a recommendation. Member states are not fully obliged, but they have assigned to it. They said they have made a consensus that these are the lines where the international community is going to, and member states have committed to this Belem framework for action. And these understanding adult education as a key part of lifelong learning is one key section of the frame, and another one is the relevance of adult literacy for continuing with developing adult learning and education. Within this framework, the BFA, the Belem Framework for Action, identifies 5 areas of action that are of specific relevance for policy and practice. And it starts, first area of action is policy indeed. So the idea is that member states should go for an adult learning, for an ALE policy, those who not yet have, or should develop them further in the framework of lifelong learning, so that people can be sure that there is a kind of accepted framework for action within adult learning and education. Second area of action is governance, so that each country has an understanding what governance of adult learning and education means, who are the actors into that, who is deciding about the appropriate way of engaging in adult learning and education. And the key point here is governance, participation of civil society and coordination. So within the governance of ALE, it is always important that there is a coordinating mechanism, often dealt with by a governmental part, but that's not always the case. So the governance of ALE should take place in a coordinated and in a cooperative manner. Third area of action is financing. Member states are asked to care for a sufficient financing of adult learning and education, so that enough funds and significant part of the public funds of the education budget is devoted to adult learning and education. This makes the principle that countries are committed and have committed that they will care that adult learning and education within their countries is sufficiently financed so that it can play its principal role. Fourth area of action is participation, inclusion, and equity, meaning that member states, that all actors should help to increase participation, to care for the situation that nobody is excluded, that all those who want to participate in learning activities have the possibilities to do so on the one hand, and on the other, that it's an equitable instrument that helps and is implemented, especially for those who need it most and for those who are disadvantaged, those who are marginalized. Adult learning and education should be an accepted instrument for especially those who have not had the opportunity to get the right skills during formal education already, or for other reasons need the possibility to get the right skills, and so that they can fulfill their learning aspirations. Final area of action, quality, number 5, is member states are it's recommended that member states have committed that they develop a high quality provision system for adult learning and education. So what is offered should be of high quality on the one hand, but should also have the quality that it means the interests of the learners. So within this tension, somehow practice should take place, but it itself, it goes without saying that high quality should serve especially in a way that learners have the right possibilities to engage in such a learning process. And finally, it is the overall aim of all these areas of action is devoted to the learner. Individual learning should be promoted by the existence of public and private and accessible provision of RALE, and the overall intention is to promote the learning processes people need to. Next slide, please, Sama. There are two frameworks, actually, two policy frameworks. I have explained the Confintea 6 framework, which helps to, in which member states have committed to promote adult learning and education. There is a kind of second pathway from UNESCO's perspective now. I need to explain that. On the one hand, we have the international conferences on adult education when a community meets and gets an understanding about their further steps and about their principal keys. But UNESCO also provides of a set of legal instruments that shape the overall field of education. And in 2015, UNESCO adopted a specific recommendation on adult learning and education. And this recommendation, for those insiders, it's called RALE, recommendation on ALE, RALE, is complementing the Belem framework for action. The BFA has now been completed by another set of recommendations, but they do speak to each other. Next slide, please. The RALE, which gives, on the one hand, a definition what adult learning and education is all about, says, for instance, that it comprises all forms of education that aim to ensure that all adults participate in their societies and the world of work. So kind of double approach with a certain focus on the world of work. It defines fully what ALE is all about. It's more than these two fields. It spells out 6 objectives, and it identifies 3 fields of learning. And I will come back to these 3 fields of learning. And it covers the 5 areas of action. The same areas of action that have been defined in the Belem framework by that conference are also part of the BFA, which was adopted in 2015 at the same time when the 2030 agenda was adopted. It's somehow in support of this agenda, and we will hear more about the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, also with regard to what adult learning and education is supposed to provide. And since then, the RALE exists, and it, it speaks to the Belem framework for action. They work as a kind of, they speak to each other and complement each other. Next slide, please. I have talked about the 5 areas of action, and when talking about the RALE, I'm also trying to help understand that's 5+3 approach, because we have member states have defined the 5 areas of action, which is especially directed to the understanding of what governmental agencies should do. These 5 areas of action, which I have explained, but the RALE also defines 3 fields of learning. So in which kind of subject understanding, so to say, adult learning and education should be divided. And it defines these 3 fields. On the one hand, at first, literacy and basic skills. So everybody should have the possibility to read and write and to engage in written communication. And adult literacy against the background of 750 million adults who cannot read and write or cannot do it sufficiently, this remains foremost and a kind of priority task for member states and for UNESCO, so that adult literacy is not by incidence spelled out as the first and one of the most important fields of learning. The second field of learning adults would engage in is related to professional development, to the world of work, professional development, with a focus on continuing education, so that adults get the skills, vocational skills they need for a kind of satisfying existence and for the possible success on the labor market. These professional skills, not that much initial vocational training TVET, but especially with a big focus on continuing training, continuing education. So this is the second field of learning. And the third one, which is dear to us and to adult educators in principle, is community, popular or liberal education, so that people get citizenship skills, so that they are active citizens and have the possibilities to participate in their societies. On the one hand, understand what their rights are. They also have the possibility to exert them, understand what it is all about, to be a full and relevant and accepted part of their societies, and that they have the possibilities to engage there. And this third part, citizenship skills, will play a relatively strong role in the future. You will also understand, or I will try to explain more about this focus. So we have the 5 areas of action and the 3 fields of learning, and these 3 fields of learning shall be, how to say, part of all 5 areas of action. So policy should be done with respect to the 3 fields of learning, and all the other areas of action are brought in a relation to these 3. So it's the 5 plus 3 approach, about which you will hear more in the explanation about GRALE. Next slide, please. I'm coming now to the global report on adult learning and education. GRALE, this is the key instrument which is at hand, which serves the international community, which is prepared by UNESCO with the help of member states and a broad range of actors within RALE. I will come back to that later. RALE is the principal tool for monitoring adult learning and education. It has been developed, or it has been tried out for the first time before Confintea 6 in Belem, and it served as the key instrument to give the key understanding about the situation of adult learning and education at that time in 2009. On the basis of GRALE 1, Confintea 6 was organized, and GRALE 1 showed the principal situation in all member states, the situation of adult learning and education. And Confintea 6 then decided that this monitoring and this global report should be used in future as well, and so that it is kind of continuing instrument, a continuing reporting, a continuing picture that is developed every 3 years on, how to say, nominally, to see in how far the recommendations of the conference are implemented by member states. So looking into the recommendations of the 5 areas of action given by the Belem framework, and in this way, from our understanding, giving constantly a picture about the global situation in adult learning and education. We ask member states to produce a national picture by a template. You will hear more about that. And these national reports for GRALE are then analyzed and brought into one full picture by the team hosted by UIL. And every 3 years, it's taken, how to say, it gives account, it provides an account for in how far the recommendations of Belem have been turned into practice. It also shows where there might be deficits, but it in principle gives an account what has been done, what still needs to be done, and where are the major gaps. So in principle, it gives a full image about the situation of adult learning and education globally. We are quite successful because about 160 member states have presented their reports for the last time, and that is a good way and a good rate, but there is still room for further development in tracking adult learning and education development in the framework of Confintea. So that is still the overall framework. I would like to, advertise for, and GRALE is looking into the developments within these fields. And we have now, last year in 2019, published the 4th report, and we will go for the 5th in 2022, and this 5th report will be the basis of the work of Confintea 7 in 2022. Next slide, please. So, when I'm asked how we are doing that and what we are trying, or what we are giving the world, I'm trying to use this metaphor of glasses. Because we give these glasses to member states. We ask them to produce a report to look into their national environment and prepare a report for GRALE. And with these glasses, and these glasses have 2 lenses. On the one hand is the Belem framework for action, the BFA, and the other lens is the recommendation on ALE. As I said, they complement each other. Only both glasses enable stereo possibility to look into the world. So only 2 lenses work. So the 5 areas of action and the 3 key fields of learning speak to each other. And we would like member states to wear these glasses, to look into their world of adult learning and education, with the hope that through these national reports, the actors get a similar view, that they can productively use these glasses, understand their own practices exactly through these classes, understand that there are 5 areas of action and 3 fields of learning, and that the whole reporting is trying to produce a vision, so to say, in a full picture of adult learning and education. And we ask member states to wear these glasses and to look into their adult learning and education practice. So that's what we, and the kind of standards we would like to build when looking into the practice field. Next slide, please. And the GRALE surveys, these are the surveys we send to member states every 3 years. We ask member states, please fill in this template, and each survey has a kind of specific form. It is always and now and only usable in online form. There is no, in principle, no possibility to fill it in any other way. And this survey that is constantly improved and is now in its, so to say, 5th form available for GRALE 5, has the ultimate aim to increase awareness of ALE across the globe and to advocate for higher levels of interest from policymakers. and practitioners and researchers. We would like to, to advocate for RALE in principle with these surveys. And each survey will assess the state of the art of RALE in member states and provides also support to fill the information gap. We get a full picture, but this full picture also discloses, the deficits where further action is still needed. And so this is part of the overall game, that a full picture is developed, but that allows not only looking at the wealth, but also on the deficits. We constantly increase the number of participating countries. And as I said, we had 160 member states who took part, but data from more than 40 countries are still lacking. We are counting, by the way, in terms of member states and associate member states. We also address associate member states with this survey. And we also try to get it from non-member states. We will see in how far the United States will contribute. Last time they have still contributed, and we are also somehow curious to see what happens with them. We wouldn't expect a contribution from Israel, but these are other questions. The number of countries is increasing, and the whole exercise we are trying from now on to get member states filling it and to increase somehow the number of contributing member states. And this series of webinars should provide the guidance to the focal points of the member states. I had it mentioned already, so that as many countries as possible respond to the questionnaire, so that we can develop the full picture and have the opportunity to look with these lenses and to help you to use these lenses of adult learning and education, so that the full picture is portrayed. That's the principle of the survey. Next slide, please. I'm now just at the end, just to give you I will not go fully into, I'm not going to explain it fully, but we have the timeline here from 2009 to 2022. There is a Confintia 6 circle, and Confintia 7 starts now. We have at the bottom the GRALE issues, which is now going into its 5th issue, and all that in connection with the Belem framework for action and with the RALE. And we also undertook a midterm review some years ago. Some of you might remember that. That's also part of the monitoring system we have developed. So GRALE is also informing the international community to at the middle of the full cycle, and we will have a midterm review also for the next cycle after Confintia 7, just to give you a bit of an understanding with the timeline, with the different frameworks, Belem framework for action and the RALE. And of course, and that is key, the gray arrow is the gray arrow, not arrow, the gray arrow is the central one, so to say, because what happens on regional and on the national level, that's key. UNESCO can try to monitor what happens, but in the driver's seats are member states. And so only that what can be recorded by us will be visible. And that's why we ask member states, please give us what's happening. And we also know that not everything, the BFA is not the origin of everything, and that many things happens without guidance. But we would like you to use these glasses and to understand the world in that way. Next slide, please. I need to hurry up, I'm afraid. Next slide. I'm now going to explain a bit more on GRALE 5. Next slide. I already said that GRALE 5 will be published at the opening of Confintia 7 in 2022. It marks the end of the Confintia 6 cycle with the Belem framework for action, monitors the BFA of 2009 and the recommendation on RALE, the RALE of 2015. And now, importantly, each GRALE has a thematic chapter, a thematic focus. And this time, the thematic focus will be on citizenship education. On the one hand, we learned from the previous GRALE that citizenship education is underserved, that and we had devoted already one issue on literacy, and we are sure that and have looked into the realities of vocational education together with health and community education already. So now the thematic focus of the next issue will be on citizenship education, ranging from active citizenship as defined by the RALE, where active citizenship is promoted, but also to global citizenship, which is now largely or heavily promoted by UNESCO, so that learners understand themselves as a part of an overall global community. It will give an overview of the situation in adult learning and education from a global perspective in the context of the 2030 agenda. I mentioned it already, the contribution of RALE to sustainable development in general and to SDG 4 on education in particular will be important. And this GRALE 5 will be the basis for the new framework for action. A new BFA will be established, and the process to establish this new framework starts now and in member states and through this report. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned it will update the trends in adult learning and education across the world with this special interest on citizenship education. It will monitor the RALE situation in the 5 areas of action and with reference to the 3 fields of learning. So the 5+3 approach will be practiced there. GRALE 5 will provide conclusions and identify key issues for discussion and action at the international level. That's the task of such a report, and it will identify key practices so that member states can relate to their own contexts. It's always part to show off of each of the GRALEs to show what happens in practice at the country level. Next slide, please. Well, a few words to the methodology. I've already explained that the survey of each GRALE is distributed to UNESCO member states. It's filled out by the focal points. Some of those focal points are among us, and some of us will be later in the second part of this seminar. The focal points are those who actually fill this report. They do it nominated by their national commission. We ask national commissions to identify the focal point, and this focal point, this person is supposed to fill in the information from the national level. That's the principal approach. And so the BFA and the RALE are monitored on the basis of these survey questions in 5 areas of action with the 3 fields of learning. And they have the somehow they do it on behalf of their country, identified by the national commission, and often come from ministries, but this is not always the case. In some, we know that also civil society and especially research organizations also are important, and often focal points come from research, independent research institutions. And there will be a specific set of questions on citizenship education. So on the one hand, and from these incoming surveys, we will provide an analysis for the monitoring chapter to show what in the 5+3 lenses happens, and we will produce a draft until June 2021 already. So the analysis will be over then, and then the production of the overall report begins. So which takes us approximately also for a year to finalize the analysis, but also do a first translation so that it can be finalized until 2022. Next slide, please. I'm going quickly through the 5 areas of action. Policy, it's measured with respect to legislation, plans, stakeholder involvement, and specifically with regard to RVA. And under each of these areas, the RALE fields of learning are measured. So policy is looked at with regard to are there legislative changes in how far there is valid stakeholder involvement and differentiation within each of the three fields of learning is intended. And as in all monitoring, as in all parts, there will also open-ended responses be asked. And this is the space where especially specific examples for progress, practice examples, or also lack of progress can be given. So in each of the 5 monitoring sections underneath, there is always a possibility to insert practice experiences, specifically good practice, but also practice that shows where there are problems. Next slide, governance. And we measure through this in how far governance activities are underway. We do that in a continuous way. There are also open-ended questions with regard to whether coordination instruments are at place. And it is also the case within the 3 fields of learning. For the first time, this has not happened for the last time. We now how to say, slowly get the full picture and we get the full 5+3 approach implemented. Governance, then comes financing. Next slide, please. It is the same principle, it is also, how to say, becomes clear that it's one of the difficult areas for monitoring. We ask member states, for instance, about the share of the public budget that is given to RALE, and we then group that into certain groups. Those with under 1% are the lowest, and those with more than 4% are the highest, and we analyze this along these lines. If figures are not available, we would like to explain why, and if information is available, we talk then about real figures, and we ask member states to provide evidence. And we are also asking whether governments plan to increase or decrease RALE spending. This gives, in principle, an example how the full survey works. We often ask member states or those filling the survey, from your perspective, put you into the shoes of the member states. Is your government planning to increase or to decrease the budget? It's often such kinds of questions that are asked. And next slide goes to quality, to participation, where member states are asked to provide, if possible, participation rates in the different fields, in the 3 fields of learning, for instance, and if possible to give the source of information. There is also open-ended questions where specific practices or specific events or specific experiences with regard to raising participation can be given. And a question is asked on whether RALE participation has changed within the 3 fields of learning, so that we can give so this gives an account for the situation in the member states, and we aggregate this for the full picture, for the full global picture on the basis of all surveys. Next slide, please. Quality. And this is the last area of action. UNESCO in principle promotes that high quality provision is offered by member states, and we would like to trace or to follow the progress of this quality development since the last GRALE. And there will be specific question on assessment practices, which is also an important point with regard to quality, and a general question on whether quality has changed for the RALE fields of learning, and an open-ended question is also offered there. And so this is the principal structure of the monitoring part. Next slide, please. And then I would also underline that next to the monitoring, there is a specific set of questions on the citizenship education, on the one hand, to get these practices for the focal point, as well as a specific set of questions that will focus on the practical recommendation of the RALE. And these questions have been developed very recently, but all these questions are then given into the full survey. Yes, next slide, please. I'm now going into the monitoring part and into a bit more into the survey. On the one hand, to help focal points to understand, many of the focal points understand already because they have participated in the past, but also for other actors to understand how things work. And the one key request is, of course, to provide relevant information and data on the right, with the right quality. And we know that this often is a major barrier, that countries do not provide of high quality data. And this data situation has been deplored often, and we know very well that this is a major problem in member states, and that we need to find ways to continue with improving data sets. But the principle of the survey is always, if good data are there, insert them. If data are not available, that we cannot do much about. But it's always possible to present the picture according to the situation at the country level. And we know that quality data are, of course, needed to make aware of key issues. The specific fields where we are always struggling to get significant information is related to financing, clearly, because these are real figures and they can be controlled and should be available. Budgets are there. Is there also an RALE budget? And this the way of getting the right information there is difficult. We had to learn that also with we were also impressed about the problems that may rise to that end. And also with regard to participation, it is often a problem to get the right figures. So that, and we ask always member states, please take care that you can give account of what happens. And ideally, practice courses, they are always followed by a kind of evaluation, and also by counting the numbers of those who have participated, ideally also with a look to whether they have successfully participated. Just as a bracket, I would also like to mention that RAMA, the Action Research Project UIL, is organizing since many years in a set of Francophone African countries, will help to understand better about the ways of measuring the success of programs. And so we are UNESCO and we are trying to give also appropriate instruments to help member states to give the right information. But the key actor here is the focal point. The focal point is supposed to fill in the right information, and the focal point is the one who selects the data. And that's why we try through this exercise to help focal points understand that out there are also actors from my country, from other countries, who can help in filling in the right information. And civil society is also part of the overall RALE situation in member states. So we would try to help the focal points to understand, please make use of information that is there. And there are institutions, there are organizations, there are other actors, and it would be good if you use that appropriately. And that's why, that's to a certain extent the essence of the exercise we are trying today. Next slide, please. Looking into the monitoring survey with regard to actors and data sources, I mentioned it several times that one of the key principles is strong involvement and participation. From the situation of member states, ideally, we would like to get the full picture. And the full picture is especially available when the data that are perhaps there can be used to that end. And ideally, the focal points make use of data sources which are accessible, available, affordable, like other um, movements, and help us to give the full picture of ale. It's at the end the focal point is responsible. We ask the focal point to fill in, but it is also in the responsibility of the focal point to give the right image and to care for an appropriate, how to say, mirroring, and to look for appropriate data sources so that the focal points are also in a situation, in the real situation, to give this info about the ill situation. And we would like to assess progress in the global situation out of these different country reports. Of course, there is the possibility to look into the situation in a country. All the national reports are published. That's not a secret. And civil society can also, and all the actors can look into the reports of their country. So the focal point needs also be careful to a certain extent because the focal point knows that this is information that will be used, will be publicly available, not identifying the focal point in person. That's not the case, but the report itself, as all the national reports will be published on the URL website. And for us, these country pictures will of course be used to paint the full global picture in an analysis of what is the situation of ale all about. And that's something we know. While we like to focus on progress and to tell success stories, we also do not shy away from mentioning where there are still gaps and needs to engage further along the lines of the Belem framework for action and the RALE, so that they are fully implemented. And so the GRALE is always also an instrument that helps countries, actors, institutions to understand where the country is also from a global perspective, and to see, yes, these are the 5 areas. I can look into the national report, and the overall analysis mentions my country even with a good practice. So that's the way how the monitoring survey is used, and where the participation and involvement of other actors is key. So the focal point is the one filling it, but ideally the focal point has the means and the possibilities to look for other data and for other sources, and ideally takes that into account. And so our UNESCO's principle is that we ask them to do so. At the end, the focal point is also responsible for the thing, and he or she does it from the perspective of the member state selected by the National Commission. But in principle, we suppose that the focal point has this possibility to give the full picture. Next slide, please. As mentioned several times, and I do not need to go too deep into that, I just want to underline that the GRALE 5 monitoring gives the background for the next Confintea, for Confintea 7, looks into the global situation of adult learning education in UNESCO member states and will be the basis for formulating the new international agenda, the new framework for action. That's why this data and these well, the analysis as well is important, so that we can paint a full picture. And also then member states in that conference and the international RALE community is in the situation to agree on key activities to promote RALE further and to further enhance RALE. And all that as the whole work of all United Nations agencies, so that's also true for UNESCO, takes place in connection or in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So we are looking at the 17 the goals, the 17 goals, and SDG 4 on education in particular. And we also understand that adult learning and education is a means, it's not only important for education, but also has its role to play with all the other SDGs. So the SDGs cannot be reached without an informed and bright and active citizenship. That's why we are looking also in this specific topic. And this will be in the focus, and ideally we will get a report that on the one hand designs a picture what happened in the past, what is needed in the future, and what is the role of citizenship education, global citizenship education, active citizenship education to that end. And on that basis, the new framework will be developed. Next slide, please. And I have now reached the end of my presentation, so I'm thanking for your patience, and I would also like to ask you to formulate your questions so that we can go into answering it. I think there is a final slide, and I also wanted to announce once more that the closed session for focal points only will take place at 3 for 1.5 hours. So where specific instructions will be given. One slide back, please, Summer. And of course, I wanted to mention that our website gives full information about GRALE. And there is URL sections in Twitter, in Facebook, and is it Instagram? I'm not always that familiar. And so I'm now at the end of the presentation and of the full picture, and we would now be in the situation to answer questions, and I have asked colleagues to formulate them and to give that, and I can also hand over these questions to others, and I just want you to keep here within the arena, and I am trying to give or to select a few questions. I just see that from Alejandro Lara, he says that all initiatives are good, but what would be our advice and how to address the serious issue on age discrimination in most countries? Anyone older than 45 is already considered old. What do we need to convince governments to enforce policies against age discrimination? If nothing is done in this area, these amazing initiatives will not work. Complementing my previous question, on one hand, these initiatives are promoting adult learning so that they can be better positioned professionally and find better jobs perhaps, but on the other hand, age discrimination would not allow them to find jobs where the new learning skills can be implemented. Okay, Alejandro, in principle, of course, I agree to the principle analysis that there is also a need to address age discrimination. And there are already things are developing. There are surveys, for instance, that do not longer differentiate or end with 65 and older, but have in their mind the possibility to identify those until 75 in a kind of active age, and those beyond 75. So the threshold is somehow moving when, and I think we also understand that in principle, aging, yes, it's happening. It's happening in different parts of the world in a different way. And I could imagine, and there I agree to your reading, that there is a certain need to counterbalance and to do something to address the issue. And I could imagine that aging will play a more important part than it has played before in the Confintia context. There are aging populations in many societies, or many societies are aging societies. Also, those who have not always belonged to this circle, like China, for instance, can also be identified as a kind of aging society, and tools are needed. And I am optimistic that the next framework for action will take care, and I take this advice already as one possibility for looking into the new framework for action, understanding that aging is a relevant topic, and for us helping to keep that high on the agenda. So thanks for the advice, Alejandro. Daniel Baril, hi Daniel. Daniel is the chairperson of URL's governing board, and so I'm happy that he is here. I'm saying hello to him, and thanks for his promotion on the one hand, and also for helping us with our work here. And I have, Daniel says that for Canadian colleagues, the Canadian Institute for Cooperation for Adult Education, ICEA, and the Canadian Commission for UNESCO will partner with the Council for Ministers of Education in Canada. And the focal point responsible to fill the survey by consulting Canadian civil society in the context of the Canadian answer to the GRALE survey. So the focal point in Canada is approachable, and is also keen to get the right data sources. Thank you, Daniel. I have then number 3, a question from Mats Een, asking where can we find information about the focal points for the different country? Who will be the focal point for Sweden? And in principle, we do not share this publicly, but please send us an email. And we also do that. We send an email to all participants, and we then have the possibility to relate you to the focal point, because at the end, it's in their responsibility, but we will forward all the contacts. So if you are interested to get into contact with your focal point, send us an email that says from which country you are, identifies you, and we will distribute that to the responsible focal point. And ideally, the focal point then will get in contact with you. We have developed this possibility because we are also looking, or we are in the situation of data security, and that this needs to be respected, and the identity of the focal points is not public, but the focal points themselves are free to approach all others. And so we are proposing this way, that we send your question, if you identify yourself and your country, to the responsible focal point. This will be a principle for the whole action. So please, Mats, send us an email, and with your advice to the focal point, we will send that then to the Swedish focal point. And ideally, and if there is kind of promising aspects within your mail, there is also the possibility that the focal point relates back to you. So that's the principle of our follow-up communication. And just to help you understand that we promote such communication. We are in favor of doing so, but need to do that also in a kind of structured way. And we hope that this way, when focal points remain in the driving seat and they have the intention to get further contacts within their responsibility, that's what we propose. There is a question from Edith Zongomonyan. She is asking, what kind of cooperation mechanisms or modalities are recommended to be established between the focal points and key civil society stakeholders of ALE if there is no system of monitoring and quality data of ALE in a member country? What is UNESCO's URL's take on this? In principle, we have to respect that the world is diverse and that there are countries with different standards with regard to quality data. And we are also asking, or countries are asked to become and to remain active along their own lines of development and according to their possibilities. We recommend always to stakeholders, to the governments in member states, in adult learning and education practice would be non-existent without civil society. And so it would be in your interest to take care about reports from civil society. So we constantly recommend to focal points to take care. We also, and we are to a certain extent proud of the situation that within Confintea, the voice of civil society is relatively well established. We always ask member states, or it's done by the Director General of UNESCO, who invites ministers to Confintea and ask the minister to create delegations that involve civil society representatives. And gradually, and we see that there is movement, gradually this partnership situation develops well. And in many countries, this partnership is no problem. And so the stand or the position of URL is to promote, to ask governments to understand what is this, where are the key partners, so that focal points get aware of where they are. We recommend, but we are also confident and optimistic that all players will understand that civil society is key for the understanding of the ALE situation. Then I have a question from Linda Morris saying that the United States are unfortunately not a member of UNESCO. Will United States participate? Would it be appropriate for civil society to take the lead? If so, how might this happen? To be frank, at the moment, we do not know. We will address, we will try to find a focal point. There are structures in the US, and last time it had still worked, although formally membership of the US was already suspended. There is not a full and fully fledged National Commission of UNESCO, but there is a body working for the better relations between UNESCO and the US. And so we are confident that we find an address to whom we will send, And but nothing is clear. We don't know. It might happen that also under the prevailing circumstances that there is no possibility at all to include the US, but we are working on it. And as always, also in this part, it will be in the responsibility of the focal point then also to go in contact with the national civil society players. There is the next question from Ramadan Aliya. Okay, and saying that Kosovo is not yet a member of UNESCO and UIL. We want to be part of the Confintia 7 process and to prepare the national report from Kosovo. How to proceed further, and is there a social procedure for non-member states? Kosovo is a special case, and there are countries that are interested in the, how to say, in this difference, and take always care that non-member states are not dealt as member states. And for the case of Kosovo, and I also understand that DVV International is active in Kosovo. However, from my understanding, there is no possibility to publish the national report from Kosovo as part of the overall number, nor is it possible to integrate into the analysis. It is nevertheless not impossible to prepare a report. And so my recommendation would be that we need to respect the rules. And from my understanding, it will not be possible to integrate Kosovo and to give it the image as it was a member state or an associate member state. But if there is an interest from the side of national members also in contact with DVV International, for instance, I could imagine that there is a way of cooperating, but as I already said, I would be very much surprised if it was possible to publish such a report underneath all the others, and or to use it for the overall analysis. But the full modalities have to be found. Cooperation with Kosovo is also possible. We have just recently received the instruction, if a representative of Kosovo wants to speak in an international conference, he can do so, but only if a representative of UNMIK, of the Kosovo government that is cooperating with UNESCO, is there. So there are ways, but we will need to find the specific ways. And so far, Kosovo will remain a sensitive and difficult area. There's a question from Therese Kuratli saying, in the GRALE 5 questionnaire, a certain percentage of ALE participation is requested. Could you please define, at least for OECD or EU EFTA countries, what kind of statistics you would like to have cited there? Whatever statistics are available, and we always ask the focal points to give the best results. And so if there is accurate statistics, cite the numbers and also give your sources, so that we also have the possibility to have a look at that, ideally. If they are publicly available, the figures, there is always a possibility to enter such information into the response. And so the understanding would be, use appropriately available public data that is available and that can be used for that. There is no kind of general instruction, use this but not this, but identify the most appropriate data source. That would be the principal understanding. And also, if there is, and this advice goes to everybody, if you as a focal point should have questions with regard how to proceed with the survey, we here at UIL are also approachable, and so we are ready to help with that. And we are also trying, if we get answers or responses that seem to have specific problems, we are trying to relate back to the focal point so that it can be corrected. Another question from Therese Kuratli is, in order to improve ALE monitoring, the definition of ALE should be made clearer. It is not clear if formal ALE is part of what is included or not, and the formal parts of education systems vary greatly between different countries. That is why comparability is an extremely difficult subject. I could not more than agree. And while in the definition, formal adult learning and education is included, there is also an understanding that we do not understand higher education, for instance, as part of adult learning and education. And also from an EU perspective, participation in higher education would not qualify for lifelong learning, but participation in a continuing education activity would qualify for that. All that to say, at times there is no clear-cut possibility, and we are trying to make meaning of the world, how it looks like. It is difficult, I agree, and in principle, we are looking into the world of non-formal adult learning and education, but I also agree that the valid and the definition in place also include formal adult education, but at least for higher education, I am so free to say that we would not go into that. And the again from Therese, is formal vocational education and training for adults part of ALE? Is continuing education in universities part of ALE? Is ALE non-formal education and informal learning, so anything outside formal education? And I couldn't say, in principle, I'm glad to say yes. Formal vocational education as a kind of initial way of training is not fully in the focus of the GRALE. Let me take it that way. We and the GRALE, we are rather looking from a perspective of non-formal and from continuing education. But continuing education provided for a non-typical student by universities would qualify from my perspective, because it's continuing education, but not part of higher education. But if it's part higher of education, it would not qualify. And so it is not always that easy to make this differentiation. And I have not answers to all questions. But in principle, we are looking into non-formal approaches, and informal learning is difficult to, how to say, to trace anyhow. So I wouldn't go for informal learning. We are not trying to portray a picture of that, but we know that assessment and accreditation of prior learning is an aspect there, and so from that perspective we are also interested. There a question from Abbas Bazargan, I suppose from Iran. Is MIL, media information literacy, considered as specific prerequisite for citizenship education in digital age and the fourth industrial revolution? If not, why? From my understanding, media literacy, although I would like to avoid the term, because we try to use the term literacy only and only in contexts where we deal with basic skills to read and write and the ability to communicate in written communication. So we try to avoid to talk about emotional literacy, financial literacy, ICT literacy, etc. All those literacies we'll try to avoid. But that's just an advice I would like to give, so that people are not confused. And so we use literacy only if it means the ability to communicate in written form. Nevertheless, we think, and I am personally sure, that this media information skills, that they are indeed a prerequisite for being an active and also a global citizen, and specifically in the digital age. And we will find ways, and I'm sure that this will be addressed in the next report, and that this part, ICTs and citizenship education, is already identified, and we are going to commission a special paper on that. So yes, it will be considered and will have its place, hopefully not with this term media literacy, but that's another way. So the answer is yes, and it will. And then I have reached, I'm good in time, reached the end, and just get the next part from my colleagues in the background. They are giving me further questions, and I hear that Daniel Baril also asked whether will the GRALE 5 report on progress since the last GRALE or since Confintia 5 2009, since it's the final report before Confintia 7? The answer is yes. We will also develop a picture that portrays the full period of Confintia 7, although principal questions go only 3 years back, but we also have the possibility, since we have the same questions in the different GRALEs, to develop a timeline or a development over time. That's said better. So although the focal points will respond specifically with a view to the last 3 years, there is also, and that will be our part, to develop the perspective over the full Confintia, because the Confintia situation itself asks for such a possibility, looking on the situation of the last period, also giving an account what has been done by member states as well as UNESCO. So this perspective of the full period will be part, as well as the last 3 years only. So the answer is yes, Daniel. Kati Antalainen, I suppose from Finland, says that thank you for a thorough presentation. Please provide further details about the preparation process of the next framework for action, the post-BFA, to be adopted in Confintia 7 Morocco in 2022. What will be its relation with the ALE recommendation 2015? I love this question, because that will be a principal requirement, because the new framework for action will need to coexist with the RALE, because the RALE remains there. And so the 5+3 approach of the RALE will somehow remain valid. And the new framework for action, also for monitoring purposes, will need to speak to the previous one. All that to say, I don't know how it will look like, and it will be developed also by us, and with the objective of contributions of those out there. We are also asking the world to a certain extent to help us, and we will try to find out an appropriate way. But formally, the recommendation, the RALE, will remain in place, and so the BFA will need to speak with that. That's all what I know for the moment, and personally, I hope that this will be managed well, because only now, with the 2015 recommendation, we have managed to integrate those two parts, because since the 1970s, there was a 1976 recommendation, these two frameworks did not fully speak to each other. So I take it as a key task, and I fully expect that it will be speaking to each other, and the new framework will also somehow be complement to the RALE. Most probably will be the other way around. While the RALE complemented the BFA, it will now be the case that the new BFA complements the RALE, so that continuous coexistence and sound coexistence is possible. Then there is a question from Chara Triteu asking, is it possible to participate in the Confintea conference without being the focal points in our countries? Participation in Confintea in principle is limited. Key invitees are the ministers and the national delegations formed by member states. And focal points even do not have necessarily are invited to the conference. This is at the discretion of the member states, and also within the possibility to invite from UNESCO side as a specific expert. But there is no how to say clear way from somebody who is interested in participating in the conference to get access. Access goes ideally through member states. Member states are those who form the national delegations, and it would be those national delegations who form the main body of Confintea participants. There is also a side way to get an invitation as an NGO member. There is a list of accepted NGOs maintained by UNESCO. These NGOs will also get invitations, and members will, from there, they will get, how to say, advisor, what is the term? They are not full members without the full right, but have the they have they are not advisors. There's another word. No, you know what I mean. They don't have voting rights, but have the right to attend and to listen, and also to speak. They are not advisors. There's another one. It will come into my mind. So that's the principal way of participating in Confintea. Final question I have until now is from Nelly Osorio. Observer, thank you. The term is observer. There we go. My team helped me. So those who are not part of the delegation and do not have the right to vote have observer status, and NGOs, for instance, have in principle, they are invited as observers, but the possibility to be part of a delegation is open to everybody. And so it's the member state also to ask anybody whom they want to be in the delegation to be that. And at the end, voting is done by state. And so, but that's that's one of the responsibilities of member states. Nelly Osorio asks, to what extent online learning can benefit the growth and quality of community education in developing countries? I am pretty sure that this this mode will progress further, and not only in industrialized countries, but also developing countries. And we from URL have a specific interest to understand what the best ways are to help community education centers as key actors on the country level, how to help them to play their role with regard to adult learning and education, to make their contribution. And the online mode will be more important. We know that the practice is growing unexpectedly. We are practicing it ourselves to a large extent, and to much more what we did before. And we are also trying to find out the right instrument that community education centers in developing countries without access to the internet, for instance, will have the opportunity to engage in online mode learning. We are just developing something, or we are trying to develop something. I'll be more careful in contact with the Commonwealth of Learning to develop such a tool. So online learning will be for sure all over the world be a major part. Now I'm coming, I think, and we are also not that bad in time. Last question from Linda Morris. Is any post-secondary education considered part of GRALE? As long as it's non-formal adult education, that's fully part of GRALE. Post-secondary in the term of higher education is not necessarily part of that. Should it take place as could we understand in a kind of non-formal education context? Yes, but otherwise the formal education parts are not fully in the interest of GRALE, with its focus rather on non-formal education, non-formal learning, and non-formal approaches. So any post-secondary education, yes, especially those in the non-formal part. And I am now 20 minutes before. I am now asking my team how to proceed. In principle, I of course want to recommend again or to refer to the last slide. So the seminar will continue. There will be extra access, and I would like to ask those focal points who have been with us to use these access points. And my colleague is just now sending a reminder to focal points so that those focal points who were identified already will just now get by email another access point. And I just see a message from Filani Fisamai, I think, thanking me personally. And if I remember right, she is from Laos and has produced and has served has played a major role within the large GRALE. So thank you very much. So I think that's the point where I can give the compliments back. Thank you for following this, 1 hour 45 minutes, but I just see there is another point, and we still have 5 minutes. I am fed with others. So there is again Abbas Bazargan. Thank you for your answer. But media literacy is developed by UNESCO since 2012 and is celebrated during Global Media Literacy Week each year since. And URL is also UNESCO agent. Then why literacy cannot have more expanded meaning in digital age? Well, of course, media literacy is important, is promoted by UNESCO. We are UNESCO and we also promote it. My hint when we do not promote the term media literacy, but the practice, of course, no doubt. But we are trying to avoid to use media literacy as when literacy is used as a synonym to competence. We try to avoid that because to a certain extent, literacy is often used as a synonym for competence, financial literacy and emotional and whatever. And we simply try to avoid that. That's the point. Of course, we promote the use of ICTs for learning process. Absolutely. And media, how to say, the use and the competence to use them properly are absolutely in our perspective, and we promote that. We just would like to be careful with the term, and I'm not saying it again. Just avoid this term. Another one from Mats In. Will there be any support from UNESCO for participation in Confintea 7 for civil society? In principle, we invite the ministers as the principal invitees to care that civil society representatives are part of the national delegations. That's the first way how we promote. And there will be a list of NGOs, and this list of accepted NGOs that is organized by UNESCO, and where ECAI, for instance, is certainly part of this. They will also get invitees with observer status. And with regard, that's the way how we can support participation. If you are asking whether we fund the travel, I'm not that optimistic, but we support always the participation of civil society within, ideally, within the national delegations. And I think that was it. And I have now exactly 2:45. So I'm once again thanking everybody for your active participation, for all your contributions. Looking forward to see those of you who are focal points in the next seminar. I have already tried to get access. So see you there. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you for your active participation, and please carry the word over. Confintia 7 has started now. We are going to fuel a process that culminates in 2 years, and civil society and everybody is needed. Their contribution is needed to make adult learning and education a kind of vital tool. And also, we will at the end remain in the status where RALE has always been with regard to the connections to formal education, but I'm nevertheless convinced that adult learning and education will go its way and will be important, and the next Confintia 7 will be one of the opportunities to understand again, for the world and for us and for everybody, what the how important the contribution of adult learning is, specifically with regard to the SDGs and SDG 4 in principle. So thank you very much. Have a nice day and see you next time. Thank you.